No jury will ever decide on whether Jeffrey Epstein preyed on young women. His death this month saw to that. But women who say he sexually abused them are still getting their day in court at the invitation of the judge handling the case in New York. One of them spoke afterwards.
It was so powerful in there, hearing all the other victims and very similar stories that I have endured. I wanted to thank the judge for letting us speak, having some closure. It's still going to be a rough road, but I also wanted to thank all the survivors that had reached out to me as well and telling me their stories. It really means a lot. I'm here for anyone that went through something similar. I thank everybody.
The CBC's Carolyn Dunn has more on this live from Washington. So how did things go down today, Carolyn?
Well, you just heard Jennifer Roaz, and it was basically a lineup of alleged victims, some of them who gave their names like she did, others who were anonymous, talking about the effects of, the abuse they say they suffered at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein, and in some cases others over the course of years in some cases. They talked about how it affected them. They talked about how it has affected them in the more recent years and continues to haunt them. And they even talked about how Jeffrey Epstein's suicide, for some of them, has made it very difficult, knowing that they're not going to be able to see him in court, although they were happy to be able to have that chance to speak to the court. Shantae Davies, who was recruited as a masseuse and says that she was raped for years by Jeffrey Epstein, repeatedly told the court, "It took me a long time to come forward. Every public humiliation that I endured, I have suffered, and he has won, but I have found my voice now and I will not stop fighting." And the lawyer of 5 of the alleged victims talked outside the court about how brave they were to come forward.
It took a lot of courage for them to write the statements and to have their voice heard, and I really commend them for being here, because Jeffrey Epstein's death, whether it was a suicide or murder, does not end the case, does not end their fight for justice. It does not end their feeling that they were manipulated and victimized and that they were child victims.
And even though the case will now be dismissed against Epstein, who killed himself on August 10th in his jail cell, it doesn't mean an end to this story either. There is many more investigations to go on, Andrew.
And so what have Epstein's lawyers been saying?
Well, they actually used the opportunity, one of his lawyers used the opportunity in court today to ask that Epstein's death be investigated. He believes that it has more of the hallmarks of a homicide than a suicide, and they would like the court to actually oversee an investigation into that. And interestingly enough, Gloria Allred agreed to that. She said that the victims deserve to know the truth, and with all these questions swirling around, that it probably was good to have a court-supervised investigation into that. In addition to that, there are investigations by the FBI, the Southern District of New York, obviously into the criminality of the alleged sex trafficking ring and who else may have been involved in it, as well as an Inspector General's investigation into how Jeffrey Epstein was able to commit suicide when he had been on suicide watch from a previous attempt, had that suicide watch removed, was supposed to be, under surveillance in a prison, and he just wasn't. He was just given ample opportunity to hang himself. And so that is yet another investigation in this. And if the court agrees, they will at least join or oversee that investigation to make sure that there is public confidence in the outcome.
All right, Carolyn, thank you. The CBC's Carolyn Dunn, live in Washington. This case has also dragged in unwillingly Buckingham Palace. Prince Andrew has faced weeks of scrutiny over his friendship with Epstein. The second son of Queen Elizabeth even issued a statement earlier this month saying he wanted to clarify the facts around his relationship with Epstein. Roya Nika is the royal correspondent for the Sunday Times. I asked her what's next for Prince Andrew and the royal family.
Well, Prince Andrew has gone to great lengths, particularly recently in that extraordinary statement he put out on Saturday, to try and distance himself from Jeffrey Epstein and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, his friendship with him, that spanned many years. I mean, they first met in 1999. I think, obviously, all of this coming up again, the story hit quite hard a few years ago when Epstein was first tried and convicted. But this has really, reignited a lot of questions that still remain unanswered by the Duke of York, specifically, and still not answered by that statement that he put out on Saturday, why Prince Andrew continued to maintain a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein in 2010 and beyond that, after he'd already served time and been convicted. That's the question that still remains unanswered.
So how has his connection to Jeffrey Epstein harmed the image of the royal family?
Well, I mean, I think, the institution as a whole is pretty robust when it comes to negative headlines and scandalous stories, and this is certainly right up there with them. It's not great. Prince Andrew has had, it's been, over a month now, very negative coverage and very scandalous bits of information that keep coming out, more images, footage of him inside Jeffrey Epstein's home in 2010 in New York was quite an eye-opener, and I think prompted him to put out that statement at the end of last week. But the Queen so far seems to be, as much as we can see, standing by Prince Andrew. When those images first came out of him at Jeffrey Epstein's home in New York a couple of Sundays ago, the Queen travelled to church with him at Balmoral in the same car, and that was a sort of show of support. So I think at the moment that the institution as a whole is sort of just about withstanding it, trying to do as much damage limitation as it can.
How would you say Buckingham Palace has handled all of this in your view?
Well, at the moment, it seems very much like they seem to be waiting to see what else comes out in the media and then reacting to it. That's sort of what we had at the end of last week with that statement from the Duke of York. It was quite, it was a very strong personal statement, but I think they haven't been able to do the sort of classic never explain, never complain stance with this because it's too big a story. But I think they'll continue to just see what sort of damage limitation they can do without trying to put out too many personal statements from Prince Andrew.
That's Roya Nika, the royal correspondent for the Sunday Times, speaking to us from London.